Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the High Acid Hot Fill webinar and workshop. My name is Dolores Serafin, and I will be your host for today. Before we start, here are a few housekeeping items for those of you who are joining us online. If you would like to ask a question, please click on the question mark symbol at the top right of your screen. I will make sure our presenters address all of the questions at the end of the presentation. You will also see a react symbol at the bottom left of your screen. This allows you to show your reactions to anything being said during the webinar. For those of you in the room, I'll ask you to step up to the microphone, which is up here in the front, or talk really loud so that those on the webinar can hear your questions as well. This webinar is being recorded. The link will be sent to you in an email after the live webinar. This hybrid workshop webinar will help you improve your knowledge on why the high acid hot fill process is effective for different types of food products, what is required to scale up production, what business development resources are available to sell into retail, and food safety considerations. Our speakers today are Craig Bansema. Craig is a food scientist specializing in product and process development since 2000. Craig works in many product areas, including confectionery to ready meals, for both retail and food service markets. Stuart Johnson. Stuart is a food scientist specializing in analytical testing, developing food products, and evaluating new processing technologies. Stuart also provides consultation and leads projects through scale-up and into license production. Daniel Hung. Daniel is a food safety specialist at the Alberta Food Centre. He has over 17 years of experience working with clients developing preventative control plans and product labels. Daniel has experience in many areas, including meat, cheese, processed fruit and vegetables, bakery, and confectionery items. And Eileen Kotowich. Eileen is the Provincial Farmers Market Specialist with Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation and has worked with farmers markets since 2004. She works closely with the farmers market managers, boards, sponsors, and vendors to help clarify the guidelines and provide coaching on conflict resolution, market rules, bylaws, and regulations. She sits on the Alberta Farmers Market Association Board of Directors as a non-voting ex officio advisor, helping them to achieve their goals as the voice of Alberta farmers markets. When not on a boat fishing in the summer, she can often be found visiting our approved markets throughout the province. I'm now going to hand it over to Craig to start us off.
All right, thank you very much. My pleasure to start off our agenda again today. As we already heard here, here's our agenda for today. I'll be presenting on the first topic, what is high acid hot fill? Why does it work? Stuart will go over the high acid hot fill process and what does a day in the life of processing here at FBDC look like. Daniel will join us for a discussion of some food safety and labeling topics, and then Eileen will round things off, talk about resources and support for business development. So who are we and what is the Alberta Food Centre? Well, we're a centre that's been here now for 40 years. We just celebrated our 40th anniversary. And from a high level, what we do is we support Alberta businesses with the growth and development of new products and the growth of their business. So we have a variety of ways we do that, variety of different ways we interact with our clients, including product development at the lab scale, scale up development in our pilot plant facility. We also have interim processing where we can help our clients to process products, and these are actual products for sale. You will find these products on the market. We also have in our incubator program, we have the incubator space where businesses can lease an area to set up their processing line and process on their own. They can operate their own business out of our incubator space. Our facility is licensed and inspected by CFIA. So with the proper licensing in place, you're eligible not just to sell products in Alberta, but nationally and even for export. So that brings us to the first topic, and it's my pleasure to bring this to you. Again, as I was introduced, my name is Craig Bansema, and I'm a product development scientist here at the Alberta Food Centre. And I've been a product developer for 25 years, 2.5 decades. And during my career, I've had the opportunity to develop many different types of products, everything from nutrition bars and energy bars and beverages. I've worked on pastries like sausage rolls and meat pies. I've worked on soups and sauces and condiments, snack foods, and my favorite confectionery candy products. But my presentation today is going to focus on the fluid products, liquid product processing. So specifically, things like beverages, soups, and sauces, and specifically for high acid hot fill processing. So just a basic outline here. I'm going to talk about the basics of high acid hot fill. So what does high acid mean? Like in terms of food, what's a high acid food? And in terms of processing, what does hot fill mean? And I'm also going to share with you some information about proper product formulation, packaging, specifically for high acid hot fill foods. So we're going to step back. Hopefully this doesn't evoke any nightmares for you, but we're going to just go back to, let's say, some high school chemistry if you've taken chemistry at that level, or maybe you've done some further work at a university or college level. So pH, how many of you knew that pH was the potential or power of hydrogen? Let's see a few at the back there. So good. So pH is actually a measurement of the concentration of hydrogen. When you add an acid to food, you're adding hydrogen ions, H+. When you add a base, you're adding a hydroxide ion, so that's that OH, that negative OH there. So when you have the perfect balance of hydrogen and hydroxide, you're at neutral. So pure water, pH 7 is neutral. There's an equal balance of the hydrogen and the hydroxide. So high acid foods, another thing to note is that the pH scale is a logarithmic scale. So in other words, a solution that measured, say, pH 5 is 10 times more acidic than a solution at pH 6. That means there's 10 times more hydrogen ions in solution. High acid foods have a pH of less than 4.6. So at this point, you might say, why 4.6? We're under 7, that's acidic, but there's something very special about pH 4.6, and you're going to find out about that in just a few slides. So if you were to do, you're all curious people, and you're going to do some searching online, you would look online, you would find a chart that would look something like these, charts that would show really highly acidic things like battery acid or gastric acid, stomach acid. Those are sitting at that 1 to 2 range, very acidic stuff. And then you move, down or up the chart, and you come to neutral, pure water being at 7, so neutral pH, all the way up to the high end where you find things like ammonia and bleach and lye, so that pH 11 to 14. But I'm here to talk about edible stuff. So we're going to focus on food. So this range is more appropriate. But most foods are actually, neutral to acidic. So generally speaking, most foods are acidic. For high acid hot fill processing, we're going to narrow it down even further. We're going to talk about foods that are less than 4.6. So, looking at this chart, we're in the range of, that tomato juice to lemon juice. We're in that range of product. So, why is 4.6 so special? It's really about this guy here, Clostridium botulinum. You might also see it as C. botulinum or C. bot. This is a ubiquitous bacteria. That means it's found everywhere. It's found in soil, it's found in water. It's pretty common, actually. It's anaerobic, which means it only germinates and grows when there's very, very low, no oxygen. So thankfully, where we encounter it, it's in its dormant, harmless spore form. But this spore, you can think of it like a protective shield or a shell around it. It makes Clostridium botulinum very resistant to heat and pressure treatment. For high acid hot fill processing, this is why we need to control pH. Because even if, when we heat it, we've done our cooking process and our hot filling process, if we have that pH higher than 4.6, there's an opportunity that Clostridium can grow. So we need to get that pH less than 4.6, because below 4.6, Clostridium botulinum can't germinate, it can't grow, therefore it can't make this neurotoxin that causes botulism. I'm sure most of us have heard about botulism and how dangerous that can be. So in this process, that makes pH a very important critical control point. So when we're running a high acid hot fill process, we need to measure pH using a quality pH meter. And there's good meters you can use in all of these different types of formats, whether it's this pocket type, a handheld, or a benchtop. They're all used throughout industry. The key here is it needs to be calibrated. Calibrate, calibrate, calibrate. If it's not working, if you haven't used standard buffer solutions and calibrated according to the manufacturer's directions, there's no way you can be certain that your meter is working properly. So this is a critical control point. It's critical. You must be confirming that your meter is working properly. Keep a record that you've calibrated your meter. Keep a record that you're recording the pH of your product. This should be a crucial, again, critical part of your production records. When you're making a product here, we're testing every single batch for pH, and we're documenting it. And before the day begins, we're documenting that we've calibrated our equipment. So we're talking about hermetically sealed products. So whether your product's packaged in a bottle, a can, a jar, or a pouch, it's got an airtight seal. It's sealed off from the environment. And if you remember from earlier, Clostridium is an anaerobic organism. So it likes this, right? And at this point, you might be thinking, well, wait a minute, cooking and pasteurization, it kills bacteria. You've probably seen charts like this, safe cooking temperatures for different items. So you're right, for most organisms, so bacteria, yeast, and mold, cooking does kill them. It destroys those organisms and renders them harmless. But remember that Clostridium botulinum is a spore former. It's heat resistant, and it takes a totally different process to inactivate those spores. It takes high pressure canning, retort processing, but that's a topic for another day. Again, equilibrium pH must be less than 4.6 in order to prevent the growth of these spores. So that is a key critical control point in our high acid hot fill process. And you might look at this and say, okay, you talk about pH, but what is equilibrium pH? I'll talk a little bit about that later. So you can think of high acid hot fill as an industrial version of hot water batch canning. So you might have done something like this at home or in your restaurant or in your kitchen. So it's a similar process, a similar effect to that, but we're doing it at a controlled industrial level. So the general steps are you're going to prepare your product, you're going to chop your veggies, you're going to mix your tomato sauce, your water, get that all together in your pot, in your kettle, in this case in a large vessel. You're going to start cooking, you're going to heat it. We're going to confirm that the pH is in fact less than 4.6 or whatever your target pH is, which is lower than 4.6. We're going to pasteurize. You're going to cook your product for the required time and temperature. Now, the key here is determining what that time and temperature is, and I advise you to work with a food scientist to look at the specific properties of your product to determine what that exact time and temperature is. Once all of that's done, you've confirmed that you are less than 4.6, you've met those other CCPs, the cooking CCP, then you're going to start filling your jars, your pans, your pouches, and your target is going to be greater than 80. We need to be greater than 80 in this case because you're counting on that hot product to actually pasteurize your packaging material as well. It's going to heat treat the packaging and make sure that anything that's on the inside there, any microorganisms are inactivated at that point. You'll then place the lid or the cap, tighten, and then invert the jars to heat treat the lid also. Some manufacturers may use a hot water rinse, a steam rinse, or a sanitizing spray for the jars. And this is a good practice. But if you're buying good quality, new, clean jars, you inspect them before filling. It might be unnecessary because that hot product can pasteurize the jar. So here's some general product categories that really work for high acid hot fill. So these are again fluid products, beverages, condiments, salad dressings, soups, and sauces. But it's not that easy because it really depends. Because there are certain soups and sauces, like cream-based sauces, that don't have that acidic nature to the point where they're less than 4.6. So it depends on whether you can formulate your product or your version to less than 4.6. Is that possible? And are you able to heat it to greater than 80? That's for the hot filling step, we need to be over 80. So that's got to be your temperature minimum. So certain products aren't as heat tolerant, they aren't as stable. So these are requirements for this process. So a little bit about product formulation. If it works for your product, you're going to want to acidify your product to less than 4.6. And you can do this in a variety of ways. You can add vinegar or, maybe a more pure form. You could add straight acetic acid. Lemon juice. Well, you could use citric acid. Or maybe it's a creamier product where buttermilk or yogurt might work. Or you could use lactic acid. Each one of those acids have their own character, their own sour taste profile. So citric is fresh and quick. You might think of it as like a fruit acid. Lactic acid is a slower, more mellow acid. A little more mild, you might say, and you would find this typically in fermented products. Acetic acid is vinegar. Can't be mistaken. We're all very familiar with it. We call it the pickled flavor, that type of acid flavor. But there's others. I mean, you can use ascorbic acid, malic acid, fumaric, tartaric. There's a whole range of acids. When you're doing that product development stage, or when you're at that stage, you're going to select the appropriate acid. And you want to select your ingredients that are appropriate for your product and process. So I have an example here. You can see on the left here a small sample of lemon juice. On the right beside it is the equivalent amount of acid in a powder form of citric acid. So yes, lemon juice may be part of the character and the ingredients within your product, and it makes sense to look at the ingredient list and see lemon juice. But from a processing standpoint, in your process, you may want to adjust the pH at a certain point. We're working with natural ingredients like natural fruits and vegetables. They'll vary in their acidity level, which means that if you have a target set, you want to adjust it at some point, especially if your product's sitting at over 4.6. It's really easy to add just a little bit of citric acid powder without changing your product. The equivalent amount of lemon juice you might have to add to get to your target pH could be a huge quantity, which will change everything about your product. So when we're formulating these high acid hot fill products, we're typically adding a more concentrated version there. And so we have something to work with at that final safety and quality check. So that brings us to some more challenging products for high acid hot fill. And I generally categorize these as the high protein sauces. So these would be dairy based or cream sauces, cheese sauces, and meat sauces. Proteins with low pH and heat don't do so well together. Typically you'll get, if you've ever made cottage cheese, you understand what happens. You add a bit of acid to milk, you heat it just a little bit, and it suddenly changes. Now you've got curds. So you can see what can happen in the high acid hot fill applied to these. You'll get a total change of the nature and character of your product. But it can be done. Again, this is something that you can work with the food scientists on the proper formulation of these styles of products. The other thing to note is that proteins, they function as buffers. So when you add an acid to a product with protein in it, there's some resistance for that pH to go down. Remember I had mentioned equilibrium pH. When you make a dairy-based, and I've seen this with dairy-based sauces, where we formulated to in this case, the client didn't want to get it too acidic or too sour, so they asked the pH to be 4.4, just below 4.6, really. Over time, due to ingredient interactions during the shelf life, that pH kept rising, and it actually went over 4.6. Thankfully, we were only at the development stage, and we could catch that and make the appropriate adjustments. So it's very important that when you do formulate your product, hold it for some time and see where the pH settles in. What is that actual equilibrium pH? The pH where it settles, it stops changing. Often when I'm talking with my clients, the topic of preservatives comes up, and these are very useful ingredients for extending the shelf life, also from a food safety perspective. When your pH, the pH of your product is between the range of 2.5 to 4, sodium benzoate would be your choice. When it's a little bit higher, potassium sorbate would be your choice, and that has to do with their effectiveness within those pH ranges. You might see some other things like acetates and lactates and so on, or as we're seeing more of cultured products. These are salts of organic acid, salt forms of those acids. Cultured products, really, they also are the same thing. They're just in a natural form. These are regulated ingredients. That means if you were to look them up in the Food and Drug regulations, you're going to find maximum usage levels. So know the regulations and don't exceed them. And it's also important to note that these aren't a cure-all solution. They inhibit the growth of microorganisms, but they don't eliminate the microorganisms. It's just delaying their growth. So even if you have these preservatives in there or other types of antimicrobials, it's still important for proper formulation, proper processing, good food safety practices, good cleaning, sanitation, and employee hygiene. So I mentioned that proteins are challenging. There's other ingredients also that don't do so well with high temperature and low pH. A really good example of this is the native starch, or this would be like the starch that you buy in the grocery store. If you were to put that in a high acid product and run it at high temperature, that starch is going to break down and your sauce is going to thin out and the texture is going to be completely different. This is why when you pick up a product and you see modified starch, modified cornstarch or food starch on the label, that ingredient has been formulated to withstand that process. It's more process tolerant. That means it can take the higher temperature, the lower pH. It also can take some of the shearing that products go through in processing. So when it goes through pumps and being piped through the piping to the various parts of the process, these starches are modified to withstand any of that shearing or hydrolysis. And there's other acid stable ingredients you can choose. So we've got gums, xanthan gum, guar gum. You've probably seen those on ingredient labels. Those also have good process tolerance. However, they do have a little bit different textural character or quality to them. So different rheology, we like to say in food science. It's really important that when you get an ingredient that you understand the specifications. And if you're working with a good supplier, they're going to provide you with these specifications, and that will give you some indication of their process tolerance, maybe some of their more technical aspects, like what viscosity, like the viscosity of the different gums that are available. So a good supplier will be able to give you that information. So everybody wants to make a high quality and consistent product, and the way to do this is to know what is your perfect product, what is your gold star product look like, and you want to define that product. And that can be by using certain tools, like get some objective measures. So I like to think of like water being the key ingredient in most products. So if you understand how much water and how much solids your product is, if you can manage that, you're going to be suited, well off to manage your yield and consistency of your product. And we have some tools that help us with that. So we could use a refractometer. There's two versions there on the left and in the middle. You can use a digital refractometer or more of the traditional or older style one that looks like a little spyglass. Those work very well. Or you could use a moisture analyzer, such as the one here on the right, that will tell you the percentage of moisture or water in your product. Viscosity might be a key criteria for your product, and there's a variety of ways that we can measure that. You can use a Voss ring. It's a very simple piece of equipment that's found on many processing lines. Very simple to operate. Take a product of your product, specific temperature, fill the well, release the gate, and see how far it flows over a set time, typically 15 to 30 seconds. You could also use a viscometer or a rheometer that measures viscosity by putting a rotating probe in there and measuring the resistance to that rotation. Very important that you taste your product. Taste every batch. You have your sense of taste, the feeling, all of those attributes, those quality attributes. You can do that just by tasting the product. You will know if something is off if you know your product well. So know your product. And then there's many other ingredients and process considerations, and this is food science, and we are food scientists. I encourage you, once you you start scaling up your product and moving to producing larger volumes, work with the food scientists. We've been educated in this. A lot of us have many years of experience. We can offer a lot to helping you get your product to market and make sure it's safe. This brings us to shelf life. Many people will ask, how long is my shelf life? And this is another, well, it depends. Shelf life is a matter of food safety. Is anything growing in your product in terms of microorganisms? Of course, we don't want that happening. So you got to have the appropriate product formulation and process. Shelf life is also about food quality. Yes, nothing might be growing in there and spoiling your product, but what does your product actually taste like at 12 months, 18 months, or 2 years on the shelf? That's important to know. But with the right product, the right ingredients, formulation, good process, good clean facility, good programs, it's pretty common to see some products that have a shelf life of up to 2 years. And this brings us to packaging. With regard to packaging, most important thing is that you select a packaging supplier that knows packaging. They know that they're going to be using new material, that it is food safe, that it's got the appropriate approvals for packaging in Canada. Make sure it's heat stable, and that can be in a variety of different materials. That could be glass, the different types of plastics, or aluminum. But again, we're talking about high acid hot fill processing. It has to be able to withstand greater than 80. The next thing about packaging is the label. Work with a label supplier that knows food labeling and the requirements there, and I'm sure Daniel will be covering that in much more detail. And you'll be applying, of course, a date or a batch code or a best before date to your product. And tamper evident packaging, that's important. So you may have seen like pop-up caps. You'll know that it's been opened if the cap doesn't pop. But some manufacturers, processors will put a band over the lid, or maybe a wraparound or a shrink wrap. Those are all different forms of tamper evident packaging. So I thank you very much for your interest this morning. I'm not sure if we have any time, if I can take questions now.
We're actually going to save all of the questions till the end of the presentation, and then the four of you can fight for the microphone to answer.
Very good. Okay.
All right.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. So I'd now like to ask Stuart to come up and share all of his knowledge with us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Stuart, and I'm also one of the food scientists here at the facility. A little outline about my talk. I'm going to spend a short amount of time reiterating some of what Craig has already told us about pH 4.6 and pasteurization, but I'll try to be brief and move on to some other topics. Recipe scale up. So how do you go about scaling your recipe from small batches to a large batch that we can produce in an industrial setting? And talk a little bit about what does a kind of a day in the life of a high acid hot fill production process look like here at our facility. So this is kind of a general, or how I think about a general project that we work on here. You know, so a company or a client comes to us with an idea and a recipe. We have to go through some product development, incorporate food safety, shelf life, and then move on to scale up in production. These tasks aren't completed in isolation. You kind of work on everything at once to build it all together. We had a previous webinar entitled Food Safety and Product Development, and that focused on the concept of building food safety into your product from the ground up, in terms of both the recipe that you're using and the processing steps that you're going to be doing at a small scale, and then as you move up. If you do things, if you incorporate food safety from the beginning, you don't run into so many issues scaling up or down the road in terms of shelf life. You know, maybe you were hoping to get a year shelf life, but after 9 months, you find, oh no, now my product is no good. I have to take it off the market. I have to go back to formulation. Maybe you've already, perfected your recipe. You just have the best product that people love, but you have to go and change the recipe, change your labels, and it would have been better to do it from the beginning. To talk a little bit more about that concept, I like to use the cost pyramid. So this is a concept that's used in many industries, from software testing to data analysis, process automation. In terms of food safety, we're talking about three things. Prevention, so that would be the cost of implementing a food safety plan up front. So there are costs involved, certainly. I've got a lot of paperwork to get going, planning, time, money, ongoing inspection. But if you do it, you can avoid the bigger costs. So cost 10 of correction. This is the cost of catching a food safety issue before the product is sold. So you haven't gone out to the market, but still everything, time, money, energy, ingredients that have gone into making that product were wasted. And then 100, failure. The cost of a food safety incident. So again, all of that product has to be recalled, has to be destroyed, and then you're also dealing with loss of future sales, loss of public trust, and worst case scenario, if someone were to get sick, or die, the 100 value might be too low. So just important to build food safety in from the beginning. Now, what do I mean by food safety? We're talking about, in this case, pasteurization. Pasteurization is not the same as sterilization. So as Craig described, there are still spoilage organisms present, but we reduce the levels and we make the conditions of the product such that they're not able to grow and spoil your product in a short period of time. So we are eliminating pathogens and extending shelf life by reducing spoilage organisms. A pathogen is an organism that causes disease, and a spoilage organism will make food go bad or reduce its quality without necessarily causing disease or illness. I have a quick picture here of Louis Pasteur, the father of microbiology, you might say, who disproved the doctrine of spontaneous generation by providing the germ theory of disease. He also worked on the principles of vaccination and came up with what we now call pasteurization. So Craig told us about Clostridium and pH 4.6. So very important. Microbes can only grow in certain pH ranges. Unfortunately, those ranges are often the same range as our food, so somewhere from pH 3 to pH 8, roughly. We have different microbes have different pH growth ranges, and we can target that to control their growth. As mentioned, for this type of product, a high acid hot fill product, pH 4.6 and Clostridium botulinum are the main organisms, the main organism that we kind of build the process around. It's severe, potentially fatal, paralytic foodborne illness caused by the neurotoxin, which is caused by the spore, which is not inactivated by just heat alone. So we use pH 4.6 to prevent its growth in the first place, as Craig told us. So pH, time, and temperature are the three conditions that we use for pasteurization. So I'll talk a little bit about those conditions now and how they affect it. This information is from a technical bulletin called Hot Filling of High Acid Foods for the Small Entrepreneur. And this is one example of conditions. They do not apply to every product, which I'll talk a little bit more about as we go along. But along the top, we have different pH levels for your product. On the right, on our left here, temperatures, and then time in minutes. So you can see on the top right here, if your pH is pretty close to that 4.6 level, between 4.4 and 4.6, you have to heat it to 80 degrees for 624 minutes in order to make adequate pasteurization. So that's like over 10 hours, really obviously not practical from a processing point of view. If you increase the temperature to 93.3, now we're at the bottom right, we have the same pH, but it only takes 20 minutes. Alternatively, if we lower the pH, say below 3.9 on the top left of our chart there, 80 degrees for 3.1 minutes gets us adequate pasteurization. Again, these numbers that I'm talking about, I have this popping up, do not always apply to every product and process, and strongly recommend that you consult with a food scientist to make sure that your pasteurization conditions are appropriate to your specific product. There's lots of things to consider: the initial load, heat sensitivity of the product, what's going to wreck it first, a very high temperature or heating to a lower temperature but for a longer time. We also have to deal with proper sampling and measuring, kettle uniformity, finding the biggest, coldest chunk within your product. So there's lots of things to consider before you just look at this chart and go on your merry way with some pasteurization conditions. But this is kind of to give an example of how the process works. The other thing I want to mention is that it's critical that it's done every time. You have to measure the pH, you have to measure and record the temperature and the times every time for every batch. And also have a recall plan in place. Things can happen, so what are you going to do if something goes wrong? Okay, that's it for my sort of pH talk. I'll now talk a little bit about scaling up a recipe and moving into production. So when I'm working with the company for the first time, there's a few questions that I like to ask and things to talk about to figure out how we're going to take a recipe from something that is maybe made in a home kitchen or a small commercial kitchen and get it up into a larger processing environment. How is it made now? Can you get your ingredients in bulk? And then what manual steps that you're doing now need to be automated? There's lots of things that we can work on changing in terms of ingredient changes or substitutions. We might need to lower the costs. We might need to improve functionality. We might need to make it more efficient for processing. So these are kind of the first few things that we talk about when scaling up. Scaling up is easy. You just multiply everything by 100 and nothing will go wrong. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There are a few things to consider. Units of measure is the first thing that I always talk about. When you're working at home, a cup of this, a liter of that, half a cup of that, a pinch of this. That's how I cook at home as well. I don't measure salt, I just toss it in there. I'm sure everybody does the same. But when you're making very large batches and you want to have consistency for all, say, 400 liters of your batch in your kettle, it's important to have the exact amount of each ingredient. And so I transition everything to weight right away. We're weighing everything. We're considering the density of different liquids or solid products to make sure that we can get a consistent product formulation. The ratio of surface area to volume of your cooking vessel is also extremely important. I've got a couple of equations up there that don't matter that much. The first is Fourier's law, which describes the rate of heat transfer from a cooking surface. And the next is the heat capacity equation, which describes heat transfer through a material. So by considering these two equations, you can start to think about how long it's going to take you to heat your product. And everybody has probably experienced this at home. If you're cooking a can of soup in a big pot, you've got a lot of heat on the bottom of your pot and a lot of surface area for that heat to exert upon the product. You can cook it and bring it to a boil very quickly. But if maybe you got family over and suddenly you put 5 cans of soup in that same pot, it's going to take much longer to heat, especially if you're not stirring it, for that heat to distribute throughout the product. So we want to think about the surface area of our vessel and how that's going to impact our heat transfer. We also need to consider how it's going to impact our water loss. With less surface area exposed to heat, you can get a lot less water lost from your product, resulting in a thinner product or less intense flavors. So you may need to change the spices or the flavors of your product as you scale up as well, depending on how the process is going to work from a heating, stirring, water loss perspective. Ingredients is another obviously big factor in terms of the price of your product and how well it's going to perform. Craig showed us a great example of the amount of lemon juice you would need versus the citric acid powder. One great example of how a functional ingredient can be more cost effective and more efficient for processing than something that might be considered a more natural or label friendly ingredient. Another example I like to use is breadcrumbs versus starch. Starch can be way more efficient in terms of how much you need to add to thicken up a sauce. Ingredient variability can also be more pronounced the larger your batch gets. So fruits might have variable sweetness, pulse crops might have variable proteins, chili peppers might have variable heat intensities, and all of these things are more noticeable when you're dealing with much larger quantities. The other thing to consider is, can you even purchase the ingredients that you want to do at a reasonable cost? Sometimes it's easy to buy things off the store shelf, but when you want to buy a pallet full of an ingredient, it might be lower cost, but you have to consider Are you able to use it in a reasonable amount of time? Is it going to spoil? How are you going to store it? Where are you going to store it? What's it going to cost you to store it? So there's lots of ingredient things to consider. The automation of your manual processes, what can we replicate with equipment? What still has to be done manually by staff in the facility? Is your product process a batch process versus a continuous process? And how easy is it to move from one piece of equipment to the next? Is it easy to pump? Is it too sticky? Is it going to burn in the kettles? There's lots of things. Product uniformity is also a big consideration, both in terms of we're making 400 jars or 1,000 jars. We want your first jar to be the same quality as your last jar. We also want to make sure that the product itself is uniform when we're scaling it up. More uniformity in your product is a lot easier to scale. So if there's just one color, if there's just one texture, one particle size, easy. But as you start to add more variability to your product, it gets harder and harder to keep the uniformity from jar 1 to jar 1,000. Not that it can't be done, just have to be careful. The other thing to think about is heat sensitivity, and is it going to stay the same throughout the whole time? We know that we heat to 80 degrees, or whatever our pasteurization conditions may be, and we have to jar at 80 degrees. That's fine, but to jar 400 liters of product might take 60, 90 minutes. So is your product sensitive to heat such that it's going to be ruined over the course of that holding period? And if so, then we need to make some changes. My last scale-up consideration is the scale of the surrounding environment also obviously changes. This may seem obvious, but it's important to have a plan for things like waste. What are you doing with the waste products that may be part of your process? Can some of them be used as a side stream, or does everything have to go to the landfill? What can you put down the sink? I know with some processes here, we have to be very careful with what we do with our wastewater, where Leduc County is going to come knock in and ask us about our BOD numbers, our biological oxygen demand for the waste that we're putting into the water system. So I'll talk a little bit about a day in the life. A lot of our projects start here. This is a picture from a 3D tour that we have on our website. I apologize if the perspective is a little skewed. The 3D tours sometimes get funny. This is our culinary lab. This is where I start with a lot of the companies that I work with. I want them to take me through what their product is, how are they making it, what does it look like, smell like, taste like. At the end of the day, we're scaling up and we may be making some changes, but I want to maintain the product that they have and make sure they're happy with the quality. I'm often asked, okay, so how long does it take to develop my product? How can we get it scaled up? And as I think Craig mentioned, it depends. That's a phrase that I like as well. It depends on how much work that needs to be done. During the application process, I've recently started thinking about new projects in terms of the 4 Ps. So what is your product? What is your process? Or how are you making it right now? What is your problem? Is the shelf life bad? The taste is not quite right. It's separating in the jar. And then what is your plan? So assuming we can fix that problem, where are you going to do your processing? Is it going to be here at the food center? Are you able to keep building through commercial kitchens? Are you going to a co-packer? That may play a role in terms of how we're going to design your production process based on the equipment that's available to you. So depending on how those 4 Ps are and how much work we have to do with each one, it can take a day, an afternoon, or several days over the course of months to develop a product such that it's ready for large-scale production. The actual production process, Craig talked about this a little bit as well. Deceptively simple, I suppose. You get all your ingredients in the kettle. Once everything has been scaled, make sure they're weighed, record all your weights, verify that each ingredient has gone in the correct ratio, and then you check your pH. Say we set our pasteurization conditions around pH 4.1. We need to measure the pH. Again, we're recording and verifying that number, and then we're going to heat to our pasteurization time and temperature criteria. For example, 85 degrees for 8.6 minutes. Again, we're measuring, recording, and verifying. And then keeping the hot in hot fill, filling above 80 degrees Celsius, and once again, measuring, recording, and verifying. Here are some of our kettles out in our production facility. We have few different kettles of different sizes with different features. On the left there, we have a 400-liter kettle. The middle is one of our workhorse kettles. It's a great piece of equipment, again, 400-liter capacity. It has a multi-paddle agitation system, which is scraping the size in there. These are steam-jacketed kettles, and they have a very nice gentle setting, which allows you to control the temperature even within 1 degree as you heat up. So if your product is very sensitive, and yeah, we can pasteurize at 80, but maybe it's got lots of sugar in there, and at 85, that's going to start to caramelize and just totally wreck the product. These pieces of equipment can be sensitive enough to heat to 80 or 81 to meet your pasteurization criteria without going too much over to ruin the product. On the right here is our biggest kettle. That kettle is 600 liters, and it doesn't have the same agitation, but it can be pressurized. So during production, we get everything into the pot. Oh, I also want to mention these kind of spider arms on the roof there, our ventilation system. Sometimes if we're making hot sauce or chili oil, it can get very, very spicy out there. So we do have some engineering controls in place to try and keep the environment acceptable to work in. We get all of our samples and we come into the lab. So here's a picture of our lab. We have all the testing equipment on site that you might need to support your food safety plan. In terms of a high acid hot fill product, pH is the main measurement that we're looking at. And we've got an example of a pH meter on our bench there. We can also do, Craig talked about bricks, we've got water activity, we got a bunch of great instrumentation in there for safety testing. And during development, we also might use some things for quality testing or comparison. Once we know that our pH of our product is good, we go back out and pump first we have to heat it up, of course. So we've heated and we've met our pasteurization criteria, and now it's time to fill. This is our filling line. From roughly left to right down the line here, we've got the wheel for getting jars or bottles onto the line. Sorry, this is hard to see in the picture. We've got the 4 filling heads, and above the filling heads is another steam-jacketed mixing vessel to make sure that we're keeping our temperature above 80. Once we fill the jars, they go through the capper, they get a label applied, they're inverted to make sure that we are pasteurizing the lid as well as the bottle, and then they can get a date code and be ready for boxing and palletization and ultimately off to market. When you're here working with us, you get one of us food scientists to help as your project lead. But when we're out working in the pilot plant with our facility, we also get access to the equipment, of course, and then one or more of our great technologists to actually run the equipment. We don't expect anybody coming in here to be an expert on how to run the equipment, and so we'll take care of that. If you're here with us for a long period of time, we would love to do some technology transfer and get those skills and expertise moved over to you so that when you are able to successfully graduate to your own facility with your own equipment or whatever the case may be, you've got the skills and the expertise in pocket, so to speak, to make a good run of it. One thing that is required for production out there is labor. So if there is manual labor required for maybe ingredient prep, if you need to chop something, we would probably do that with equipment. But if there are some manual processes, getting bottles on and off, for example, it's up to the companies to provide their manual labor for the process. And then the last piece of the puzzle is cleaning. So overnight, we have a company come in to clean all of the equipment that was used that day. Each piece of equipment has its own cleaning procedure based on the type of ingredients or product that it was making. And those cleaning fees are billed back to the clients based on the equipment that they used on a $25 per hour taken to clean basis. Record keeping. I was harping a little bit on measure, record, verify. It's very important to have accurate records, and it's essential to food safety. It's never too soon to put a good record keeping in place. Basically, you want to be able to show what was made, where, how, by who. So the type of information you're going to need onto your records: company name, product name, date, lot code, your target measurements, then your actual measured measurements, who did the measurement, a signature, and maybe a supervisor or someone to verify that that was all done correctly. Basically, you want to have a plan in place so that you know where each ingredient came from. You can track it through your facility, through your process, and through your sales as well, so that if there is a problem, you're able to track down that product. A few examples of records: formulation records, critical control point records, shipping and receiving, standard operating procedures, training records. And then if you're making an organic product or a natural health product, there might be different record requirements that you might need for that as well. That pretty much brings me to the end. So thank you very much, and we'll do questions at the end. But next up on our docket, we have Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Just a reminder for those of you that are online, if you have questions, you actually can type them in now and we will address them at the end, just so you don't forget them, because I tend to do that. So now, Daniel, welcome and thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm Daniel Hung, Food Safety Manager at the Alberta Food Centre. So I'll be discussing, talking about food safety, labeling. We'll cover some of the similar topics that you've heard from Craig and Stuart. Just shows that they are important things that we want everyone to. So we're going to focus on the licensing aspects, the different licensing that's available. So if you're selling within the province, we'll talk a little bit about PHS and also CFIA licensing under the Safe Food for Canadians regulations. Talk a bit about the parental control plans and what those are, and focus as well on labeling your food products. This is kind of a table to kind of contrast the two different licensing aspects. So on the left-hand side is the food handling permit. That's through the Alberta Health Services. So they are mandatory for commercial food establishments. If you're making certain home-based food products, low-risk ones, you can make those out of your home without food handling permit. You do have a limited area sale under the AHS, so you're within the province. You still require food safety training, and you should be keeping records of your process, as Stuart and Craig mentioned. With the Safe Food for Canadians license, it is regulated by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, so you will have oversight from that body. Your foods can be sold within the province that it's made, the additional ability to sell interprovincially, so outside of the province, and be able to export outside of Canada if you wish to. You do need to have a production facility that meets regulations, and there's a little more onerous documentation process. You do need to have a parental control plan. So in addition to things like SOPs, records, food safety plans, it's a little more involved than we require under Alberta Health Services. As I mentioned, with low-risk home-prepared foods, you may operate without a food handling permit for certain categories of products. So have to follow Alberta Health Services guidelines for safe food handling in your kitchen setup. Your sales are limited in this case to online farmers markets and special events. So it's quite limited if you're doing the low-risk home-prepared foods. If you are operating out of a commercial food establishment, whether it's a commercial kitchen or a restaurant, you do need that Alberta Health Services food handling permit. You do have a little bit larger market within the whole province. So there's food safety training available through Alberta Health Services, which is a requirement for your food labels. Even though you're selling within the province, you still should be manufacturing and labeling according to the federal food labeling regulations. So the Safe Food for Canadians license, it's a newer regulation that came into effect in 2019 with the creation of the Safe Food for Canadians Act and regulations. It is required for all interprovincially traded food products, and it standardizes regulations for all food products. Prior to 2019, only certain commodities required oversight by CFIA and regulations, so things like meat, dairy, processed fruit, vegetables. Those are mandatory ones that had CFIA oversight. Other ones, like making cakes, cookies, that sort of thing, although you have to meet their same regulations, there is no oversight by a regulatory body. So with the Safe Food for Canadian regulations, it's created a level playing field for all manufacturers. All right, so in the Safe Food for Canadians license, as I mentioned, a written parental control plan is required. So within that plan, you would have your food safety plan or HACCP-based food safety system as a common one for that. There's no prescribed way how you have to have your plan, as long as you have documentation on how you control your hazards within your process. But a common method is a HACCP-based system. So there is guidance available out there. If you want more prescriptive way, there's historically the Food Safety Enhancement Program approach to a parental control plan. That's a good resource for a little more detail on how to develop a parental control plan. So it covers the development of your HACCP plan, records, parental control plan on building maintenance, sanitation programs, employee training, equipment maintenance. So as I mentioned, the facility needs to meet better regulations. So within the Safe Food for Canadians regulations, there is information on how you have to have your facility designed for sanitary purposes, with sanitation, and making sure your building isn't going to be a source of contamination itself. You do need to apply for a license prior to manufacturing a food product in this case. So CFIA will review your whole written program. They'll ask you to submit that to them along with your formulation records, product labels, and they'll do a full review of that before issuing a license. There are some other commodities under the manufactured foods category that will get auto approved, but most high acid hot filled products that fall under the processed fruit and vegetable regulations would go through CFIA. CFIA has a service standard of 70 days, so if you are thinking about getting licensed, take that into consideration that there's a 70-day time period from when you submit your application to when they'll review it. They have up to a 70-day time frame. Once you become licensed, you will be inspected by the Canadian Food Inspection Agency. So you'll have inspectors that come through facilities to do certain tasks at a prescribed frequency. Could be monthly, a few times a year, depending on the risk category of your establishment. Talk a little bit more in detail about a parental control plan. So as you've heard from Stuart and Craig, talk about some of the documentation you need to have in place. So your parental control plan includes your SOPs, your standard operating procedures, things like how are you going to calibrate that pH meter, how are you going to calibrate the thermometer, how often do you have to calibrate it, calibrating at 0 and 97 degrees, pH meter, calibrate it, different standards. And you have sanitation trainings, making sure the equipment's cleaned the same way each time that you do that sanitation, so you know every day that it is clean. You'll have your training program as another example. So employees are trained to do the tasks in your process, so that they're taking the pH properly, they're measuring the temperature of your kettle in the cold spot of that kettle, not right next to the kettle wall where your heat's being transferred to your product. This also includes, as I mentioned, your HACCP plan, so your forms on how you define what the hazards are within your process and what steps you've taken to control them. I'll also talk about records. So your calibration record is the form that you'll fill in that the employees have been trained on to calibrate your probe for your temperature. So you have your record that shows that you calibrated it every day, week, month, whatever is defined in your program. Formulation records, we're going to be recording down how much of each ingredient you've added to each batch. CCP records, so it's for pH. I need records to show that you did indeed meet those. If there's ever an issue or question about your product, you have that proof that yes, we did cook it to 80 degrees, we hit a pH less than 4.6. Also, labeling is another important one. You may have seen quite often food recalls due to undeclared allergens out there, so labeling is another important aspect. Have your records to ensure you're using the correct label for the correct products. With production records, again, it's a place to document and monitor activities. If it's not recorded, it didn't happen. So if you don't have that documentation in real time, if somebody was to ask you, the inspector was on site saying, okay, show me your cooking records for yesterday's production. If you can't produce that, you don't have that proof that you actually cooked it, and product may have to be put on hold or recalled. So, obtaining accurate records in real time is very important. As you've heard, your records need to include kind of identifiers to tie it to each batch. If you have a recall or you're doing your traceability exercises, you need to be able to account for all the product that you've made. You don't want to have to recall more product than necessary. So having those unique identifiers, including the product name on each production record, the date that you produced it, the traceability code, whether it's a best before date or a lot code that you put on your jars, should also be a batch record. And batch size, how much product did you actually make? That way, when you're doing that traceability, you can say, we made 400 kilograms, produced this number of jars on this date. A lot easier time. Now, CCP records. So you've heard about that a few times throughout the presentation. These are critical control points. They're steps in your process designed to eliminate or reduce a hazard. And in the high acid hot fill process, pH, pasteurization, have been talked about already as critical control points. Another one is your container inspection. So you're going to be putting your product into a container. So you want to inspect that to make sure that it's free from foreign material as well as any damage. How do you determine critical control points? So you've heard that pH range to control Clostridium botulinum, 4.6. But where do we get these numbers from? So it's based on scientific studies that people have done to know that if you get pH less than 4.6 in an anaerobic environment, we're not going to allow Clostridium to grow. Cooking time and temperature will ensure that any vegetative cells, any bacteria that's currently living will get killed and aren't going to continue to grow once you put your product into that jar. So those are all based on studies that have been done to verify that there's certain log reduction of bacteria based on the time and temperature you're cooking to. Now, your empty container inspections, as I mentioned, you want to look at your jars, making sure there's no debris inside, they don't look physically dirty, they're not chipped or damaged. So not only you want to make sure the consumer is getting something that's clean, it can also affect your processing. If you have a damaged jar as you're filling with a hot liquid, that damage may cause it to shatter. You may have a bigger issue trying to deal with broken glass that's gone everywhere and trying to determine did that product jump into other jars on your line, did it get into your kettle. The empty container inspection prior to filling is also important. You do want to document it as well. It's less defined compared to pH, where you have physical number you're recording. Your empty container inspection is more that, yes, we've inspected all the jars for that last hour that we put onto that inspection production line. Hourly could be half hour, whatever you define in the program. This is an example of portion of a form that you might have for a CCP. So you have your product name on there, the date of your production, your code date, so this will correspond to the date that you're also putting on the product itself that's going to go to retail, and the batch size. Then under the process, you've got your CCP1B, that's your critical control point, the first biological one, pasteurization. You can see we've got the range or limit identified, so greater than or equal to 90 degrees Celsius. That's where we want to hit for the cooking temperature. We define a time on the record, greater than or equal to 12 minutes. You also have a spot to record down what the time and temperature was at the start of your holding period and the time and temperature at the end of the holding period. And when you come back down the road, you can see that we met that critical limit. There's also a location for your second CCP for pH. So we've got the range there at less than 4.2. As you heard, less than 4.6 will control Clostridium botulinum, but your process, the defined time temperature pasteurizing for will be based on your pH. So your actual pH on your record will be less than 4.6. So you have a spot to record the pH. You also have a location for the temperature when you're doing the pH. So you don't want to be measuring pH at 90 degrees. Measured at room temperature to be accurate. As Stuart mentioned, you want to have a spot to record down the initials and the signature of the person that's done that physical monitoring of the time, temperature, and pH. And then we usually have somebody doing it on-site. So this would be a second person that's verifying that the person doing the monitoring has done it properly according to the procedures that you have written. So occasionally over time, as the days, months, years go by after somebody's been trained, they may drift away from what they've been trained on. So the on-site person will ensure that they're still doing it properly. Then we have the verification at the bottom of the record. Ideally, it is verified by somebody else other than who's done the monitoring. It could be the same person that did the on-site, but you don't want to be checking your own work. Because if you've already made a mistake the first time, if you're checking your own work, you may not catch that. So the verifier will verify that the record is filled in properly, the information marked down on that record makes sense, and sign up by the date and time. Now we'll talk about kind of labeling requirements for food products. So it does fall under two different regulations, the Safe Food for Canadians Regulations Part 11, as well as the Food and Drug Regulations Part B. We'll discuss the core labeling requirements. There are other topics on claims and things like that, but we won't have time to get into that. We'll just stick to the core labeling elements. We'll talk briefly about bilingual labeling, common name, date markings and storage instructions, name and principal place of business, net quantity, nutrition labeling, and give some ingredients and allergens. The bilingual labeling, pretty much all of the core labeling elements that I mentioned on the previous slide need to be bilingual, both French and English. There are certain things you may have on your labels, maybe a history about your company, recipe examples. That's what we refer to as the romance copy. That doesn't have to be bilingual, but ideally it would be bilingual. That way everybody in Canada can read that. Your company name and principal place of business, that's another exemption where it doesn't have to be bilingual, so you don't have to translate your company name into French or into English. That can be left as is. Common name, this is the name that you call your product, whether it's hot salsa, strawberry jam, that would be the common name of your product. So certain products, like strawberry jam or ketchup, they have a standard defined in the Canadian Food and Drug Regulations or in the Safe Food for Canadians Regulations document. So if your product is one of those standardized food items, it needs to meet that standard to be able to be called a jam. So if your product only has 40% fruit in it, let's say strawberry jam as an example, you only have 40% fruit, you can't call it a strawberry jam. You have to meet the standard of 45%. So you'd have to pick a different name at that point. So it might be called a strawberry spread. If you're making a ketchup and you decide to put something else in there as a sweetener instead of sugar, you wouldn't be able to call it ketchup anymore. It doesn't meet that standard. Now, if your food product, what you're making doesn't have a standard defined in the regulations, it would be the name that food is generally known by. Like a salsa, for example, there's no standard for that. So, salsa, hot, spicy, garlic salsa, whatever you want to call it. So it does need to appear on your main display panel. So this would be what's commonly known as the principal display panel. It's the one that's facing the consumer when they see it on the store shelf. That part of the label. Now, date markings. So it is a best before date is required on food products with a shelf life less than 90 days. Most high acid hot fill products have a 2-year shelf life, so you wouldn't require a best before date. However, a lot of the retailers like to see that. A lot of consumers like to see a best before date, so they know when product will be best quality until. It's not an indicator of food safety, it's just how long will I know that this product is still the same flavor, same color from the date that it was made. There's a standard format defined in the regulations. So it's either the 4-digit year or 2-digit year followed by the bilingual code for the month. So it is letters for the months, either FE, JA for January. You can't use like FEB for February because it's no longer bilingual, so it's 2-digit defined code. There's another example there of just the month and the day. So those are for products that won't be lasting that long. So things like breads, where they typically only last for a few weeks on the shelf. they wouldn't have a year associated with it. So you'll need that for clarity. Examples there. So best before is one that is bilingual. So if you write best before on your label, you also need to include the French for that as well. Now storage instructions, they're mandatory when the storage condition for that food differs from ambient to room temperature. So most highest hot fill products don't need to be refrigerated. So you would see something like refrigerator after opening, you might see store in a cool, dry place on your label. That way the consumer knows how to handle that food product once it's been opened. So although when your product's in a jar, it's shelf stable. Once you've opened it, you now introduce air. You suddenly stuck a spoon in there, that's dirty. Keeping it refrigerated will help to control so won't stop it, it'll slow it down. Your business name and location. So every food product needs to have your company name and an address or tying it to place of manufacture. In the regulations, there's no defined mandatory format for the level of detail you need to include for that address. You just say that should be complete enough for the consumer to be able to contact you by mail. Standard guideline is to include your name, province, and the city that's manufactured in. You can include the postal code if you want to. A lot of companies are hesitant to include the full address, so people don't show up, but generally something that's complete enough to be able to receive mail. There are certain type height requirements for some elements on the label. Your name and address is one of them, so it should be in a minimum type height of 1.6 millimeters or 1/16 of an inch height, so it is legible for the consumer to see. Net quantity, so this needs to be again on the principal display panel. So this is the one facing the consumer when they buy it on the shelf. The volume for most liquids, so liters, milliliters, and weight for most solids, grams and kilograms. I say most, as there are some things like pickles, which have a solid and liquid component. They're sold by volume, olives, and other things like honey, for example, sold by weight, but is liquid. So certain things, there are little nuances there. Bilingual symbols, or if you choose to write out the full word for grams, kilograms, liters, and milliliters, you'll need to translate that both French and English. Also stating net, you'll see on some labels, some companies might put net or net weight. It's not required, but if you do choose to write that on your labels, it does need to also be in French and English. The word net is bilingual, so if you just put net 500 milliliters, that would be fine. There are minimum type heights for your net quantity as well, again based on the size of your label. Generally, a 3.2 millimeter type height would fit most of our products. We're going to talk a little bit about nutrition labeling now. So most foods sold need a nutrition facts table on them. The regulations do define what information has to be within them, as well as the size of the nutrition facts table. These are based on the size of your total labeling surface on your product. So depending on the size of the jar or the package that you have, will dictate how large of a nutrition facts table you need to have on there. Nutrition facts tables, the information within them, the serving size, the nutrients declared in there are based on reference amounts. So there's a document called the Table of Reference Amounts, which defines, like for a jam, might be a tablespoon size. So every jam out there, the nutrition facts table, daily values, and that would be based on that tablespoon. So the consumer looking at one jam to the next can easily see and compare nutrition information between the two products. Whereas if it wasn't defined, you might have a company using 2 tablespoons. One might use 1 tablespoon. Using a smaller amount will make it look like your product has less sugar, less fat, whatever it may be compared to other products. That's why it is a standard size for that. There's no defined way of how you have to arrive at your nutrition facts information as long as it's accurate. So you may have a spreadsheet where you put all of your specific nutrients for each ingredient. You created your values based on that. Some companies may choose to send their product to a lab, get the calories, fat, all those different items analyzed. There's online databases as well that you can enter your information into. As long as the source you're using is accurate, that's basically what the regulations say. So certain software doesn't allow you to account for losses. If you're cooking something, you're driving off 10% moisture, that will affect nutrients within your those sorts of losses. There are also numerous different formats you can use. There's over 100 different nutrition facts table formats depending on the package conditions that you have. Here are some of the more common ones. So the standard format, this is a table that will be in both French and English on your product. You'll see those more on larger format products like cereal boxes and things like that that have a lot of surface area. For smaller products like Ice Hot Fill, bilingual standard, which contains both the French and English in one table, is common. There's also the bilingual simplified standard format. So this one would be for products where they have very little nutritional value, and 6 or more of the core nutrients can be declared as 0. So things like a chili oil, some of the jams too may not have a lot of minerals, protein. So if you can declare 6 or more as 0, you can use the simplified standard format. List of ingredients. So any food product that has more than one ingredient needs to have a list of ingredients on it. Similar to the name on your product, the ingredients need to be declared by the common name. So if there's a standard in the regulations for it, you have to use that standard name as well. It needs to be in descending order by weight as you add it into your kettle, whatever it may be. So from most ingredient to least ingredient on your ingredient list. So if you're adding things that have components, so if you have a spice blend that might contain spices, salt, sugar, you do have to declare those either in brackets after the ingredient you've added, or if you know the breakdown, you can include it as if you've added those individual ingredients into your ingredient list. Another item, sugars and sugar-based ingredients. Those need to be declared in brackets and grouped together. This is a newer requirement, again, so the consumers are aware of how much sugar is in there, and manufacturers don't hide it by separating out 5 different sugars throughout the ingredient list. Now you have to declare your sugars in the order based on the weight of all the sugars combined. Allergens need to be declared by common name. What we mean by that is you can't use, if you have nuts in your product, you can't just say tree nuts. You need to say you put almonds in there or hazelnuts. So you have to declare the actual allergen in there. Or if you use fish, you can't just say fish. It would need to be anchovy, salmon, tuna, whatever that it is added. Here's an example of a list of ingredients. So your ingredient name needs to be in bold, same as your containment statement or allergens. So the first ingredient, soy protein concentrate, you can see in brackets, they've declared the components. So the soy protein concentrate, tapioca starch, and salt. So those are what come within that soy protein concentrate. In the green box there is the sugar, grouping of sugars. So if you have added individual sugars into your product, you do group them behind the term sugars. If you have ingredients, let's say that soy protein, for example, the dark chocolatey coating there contains sugar, you just leave that within that ingredient. You don't have to group that with your group of sugars as well. The ingredient list does need to be differentiated from the rest of the label. So you can kind of see in this image of the black box around it. So that's one option. You can have a black line above and below your ingredient list. Or if you have contrasting colors, so if the ingredient list is on a white background and you have a blue all the way around it, that's another way to differentiate it. I just want to ensure that consumers know what your ingredients are and where to find them. If you do use a may contain statement, so it's not an excuse to not do sanitation and cleaning between different products. May contain statements should only be used where you've taken all precautions to eliminate that allergen from your process. But despite those steps, it may still be the presence of an allergen. With allergen labeling, there's two different ways that you can do allergens. One is declaring them immediately after that ingredient. So if you had flour, you didn't declare wheat in the name, you declare wheat at the end. Liquid albumin, so consumers may not know that it's egg, so you declare egg afterwards. The chocolate chips contain milk and soy, so you can highlight those there. Another option is in a contain statement after the ingredient list. So you can see this same ingredient, rather than adding additional space in your ingredient list, you just have a contain statement identifying it contains wheat, egg, and soy. You can't do a combination. You can't list some of the allergens in the whole list and some in a contain statement. It's either one or the other. That way, if you only put flour in your ingredient list, didn't put it in the contains, the consumer may not know that it's flour. They just look at that contain statement. So use one or the other, not a combination. The last thing that we'll talk about is the front of package labeling. So this is a new requirement that transition period is ending. So all food products now, as of January 1, 2026, have to contain a front of package label. So this applies to foods that are high in saturated fat, sugar, and sodium. It's two different thresholds. So foods that have a reference amount greater than 30 grams, if you have 15% or more saturated fat, sugars, and sodium, you need to put that statement on there. So the logo will go on the front of your package. If your food has a reference amount less than 30 grams, the threshold has been reduced to 10% of the daily value for fat, sugar, and sodium. Now, if your food only contains one of the items that meets the threshold, you still have that same symbol, but only identify that it contains fat. That was the one. Second example on the right, that product only had fat and sugar. It didn't have meat threshold sodium. So it's still the same symbol. You just declare which ones of those ingredients meet the threshold. There's some resources here that you can access to go over labeling requirements. There's some on developing a parental control plan. So those are included there to help you in your journey as food manufacturers.
All right, thank you, Daniel. And to everyone online, I am so sorry. I know we had scheduled this to end at 11:30, but we still have one more speaker to go and some questions. So please hang on. I hope you can. If not, we will be sending out the recording later today. It might not happen until next week, but it will happen. So now I'd like to introduce Eileen Kotowich, our farmers market specialist.
Thank you, Dolores, and thank you everybody for being patient. And something else, we will be sending out the presentation itself. I've seen a few of you guys in the room taking pictures, so not to worry, we will get it as a PDF so that you've got all those links and stuff that you can look things up. So yes, I am the farmers market specialist with Alberta Agriculture, and I'm part of the business development unit, which is part of the larger food safety and development section within Alberta Agriculture and Irrigation. So my role is to manage and administer the Alberta Approved Farmers Market Program for the ministry. So I work with communities and nonprofit groups that want to start a farmers market. But I also, when I'm out, because I visit about 50 to 60 farmers markets each year, I talk to the vendors about what this facility can do for you, as well as what our business development support is for you as vendors. So we work very well as a team. We don't want to just be working on your production side. We want to make sure that your business is growing at the same rate and you have the same skills in that area as well. Within our business development unit, our manager is Cody Cunningham. We have right now 3 business development officers. Flavio Salinas works out of Edmonton, Marguerite Thiessen out of Stony Plain, and Janet Henderson is out of Airdrie. Marguerite and Flavio are here, so if any of you folks in the room who want to maybe chat with them, you're certainly welcome to do that after. All right, so what do we do as business on this business development side? So we're here to support you with webinars or in-person sessions like this one, some online resources as well. We have business tools and resources on our website. So the written materials that you can have a look at, print off, or just scan online, Everything is within that agro-processing business resources website. And for those clients who sign service agreements with this facility, so they're working with our amazing scientists on that product side, you also have access to our business development officers for coaching and mentoring, and access to a peer networking group, which is fantastic because you get to talk to those people who are like you and learn from each other in that way. So how do we come up with these ideas? Well, we listen to you. We listen to our clients. What are your challenges? How are you trying to solve these problems? Some of you will identify, I need training in this. We look at the trends that are going on. We look at what's going on in other provinces or right across North America on innovations and try to bring that back to you so that the learning is here for you so you don't have to go searching for it. So the learning resources we have with respect to the webinars and the workshops, in the last couple of years, we've really focused on the market channels of retail and food service. So we've put on webinars, we've done in-person workshops, and we want you to know what does it take to get into these channels, but as well, how do you stay there and make sure that you can be successful in those areas. So we bring in industry experts who know that industry inside out and can tell you those things. So if any of you have watched our retail webinars, we've used Peter. So he will talk to you about what you need to do to get in, but more importantly, and how difficult it is to stay on those shelves. So it's that advice that way. But we also bring in your peers, people in the industry who've gone through this path a little bit before you, and they will share their stories, share their challenges and what they've done to overcome those so that maybe your learning curve can be a little bit shorter. We've also done some work in e-commerce, so the same sort of thing. We've got written materials, but we did have a webinar with Tom Harrison, who talked about how do you sell on Amazon. I mean, COVID changed our world, right, in so many ways. And yeah, we had some food being sold online before COVID, but COVID went nuts, right? We had so much happening online. So knowing that channel and looking at it, if that's an opportunity for you and your business, we wanted to make sure you've got resources there. We've also done some workshops and webinars on general resources that go right across those market channels. So things like, how do you make your sales pitch? What do you need to say to have that compelling story for that buyer in front of you, whether he's a retailer or even a customer? How do you tell your story and make that pitch so that they want that product on their shelves or in their bags? Finding an ingredient supplier. If you're scaling up, maybe where you were getting your ingredients in the past doesn't work anymore, or you need to adjust your ingredients. So we've done a webinar on that, so you can have some ideas of where to go to look for different ingredient suppliers. Same thing with working with brokers and distributors. What are they? What do they do? How much do they cost? That sort of concept there. And then communicating with all those folks in your supply chain to make sure your business is successful. So the business tools and resources section of our website, this is where our written material is, and all of our all our webinars are posted here as well. So it's not just our written materials, it's also these webinars. So we've got information on how to conduct market research. Maybe you're wanting to look at making sure that the consumer preferences for your product haven't changed, or maybe you want a new opportunity and you look at the number of immigrants coming in with different cultural preferences. You want to do that sort of research. Business planning is important for you, whether you are brand new or whether you are an established company. So the information that's there can help you do your business plan in a really solid fashion so that you can sell your idea to potential financiers, for example. Knowing the regulations, every one of our previous speakers talked about the importance of regulations, and it is your responsibility to know your regulations and be in compliance with them. And we can't talk about that enough. If you aren't following the regulations, you don't have saleable product, period. So we have resources on telling you where to find those regs. So whether they're provincial regulations or federal, the links are on our site to help you get into there. Skip over to the cybersecurity piece. You know, we've all heard about the big cybersecurity takeovers of larger companies that have impacted us in different ways. But we did do a webinar not that long ago where the speakers talked about how these guys are coming after our little people too, our smaller organizations, because we are kind of like low-hanging fruit. We may not have the security in place as well as some of these larger companies, so it's easier for these hackers to get in. So that is a great webinar to check out. We have written resources as well, just to make sure that you are doing everything you can to keep your business safe so you're not ever held ransom by anybody. We have a couple of really great online, God, what's my word? Directories, brain fade there, for you to use. One is on finding services. So, and both of these work the same way. Sorry, you can't really see this, but both of these directories are companies that have gone on there voluntarily. They wanted to be listed. So it is not a complete list of all the companies that can help you in certain areas, but it's a great place to start. So each of them works the same way. You download or you use the down arrow to come up with your service category. So that's for your distributors, wholesalers, food brokers, label suppliers. So maybe you need somebody to do testing for you. So there are analytical labs that are listed there. Or maybe you need your labels redesigned. So that's for your graphic designers. So you select the broad category and then you continue to drill down so you can find the company that works for you and give them a call. And because it isn't a complete list, you may call companies and they'll say, yeah, it's not really where I fit, but you could try this company. So at least you'll get those continued referrals where you can keep looking for people that will help you. On the processing industry side, we've got companies listed there. So maybe you're looking for a new ingredient, or maybe you need, say, powdered eggs. So you go under the eggs and egg product category. And again, continue to drill down as you go across in the specialization side of things. You bet.
All this information is under the Food Centre website?
It sure is.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay.
you betcha. But we'll send you those links too.
Yeah, no, I know, but I was just a little bit lost.
Yes, sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's all, in the, yes, it's all on those sites. Co-packing. This has been talked about a little bit before. Co-packing is very important for our manufacturers. If you're moving out of your own, say, small space and going larger, maybe you're selling just at a farmer's market now and in a smaller commercial kitchen, and you need to ramp up, and you may want to use someone who can co-pack for you, do that manufacturing for you. We have a whole section on our website around co-packing and the importance of that. And even thinking about the fact that co-packing can be so much more than just that manufacturing. Maybe you need to have your recipe reformulated and rejigged a bit. Some of them are able to help you with that, or they may be able to help you on the labeling and design and packaging side of things because you don't necessarily fit their line. So lots of opportunities out there for you to use co-packers and the different co-packers. Something that's really important for you to keep in mind if you're going this route is figuring out what you need, exactly what you need, and talking with those co-packers and finding that right fit, finding that marriage between you, because it is a really important relationship. And putting a legal document in place as what are you going to provide, what do you need, and having your co-packer saying the same things, or what are they going to supply, so that you're not ever at odds with what you think you're supposed to be getting and what they're actually going to provide for you. For those people looking for a co-packer, the Alberta Food Processors Association has a co-packing portal called Alberta Food Connect. So you can go on there and search for people who may fit your co-packing needs. And if you have additional co-packing capacity, maybe you have additional time in your own facility where you could manufacture for somebody else, you can be added to that for those people who are seeking you out too. A little bit about our farmers markets, because even though you may be an established company, don't forget about the farmers market world. So the program that I manage on behalf of the government is started back in 1973, 74 as a way for there to be consistency in those communities that wanted to start a farmers market and fall under the government umbrella. So something you need to keep in mind if you're selling at a farmer's market is anybody can call themselves a farmer's market, but that don't make it so. The only farmers markets that are true farmers markets are those that fall under our government umbrella. So they are the Alberta approved farmers markets. So you just need to kind of keep that in mind if you're wanting to sell at different ones. So the whole point of our program is that we have provide an operational framework through minister approved guidelines that are really minimum standards that these markets need to meet. And that is important for you if you want to sell through this channel. Right now, we have 150 approved farmers markets. And when I started with farmers markets 21 years ago, probably April 1st, we had 101. So we've grown significantly the number of markets across this province, all the way from high level La Creek down to Pincher Creek and everywhere in between. We have seasonal markets, year-round markets, multi-day markets. So there's a lot of opportunities for you to be in this stream and to do really well with your business. We too have web pages under Alberta Approved Farmers Markets, information on how to start a market, resources for our managers, resources for our vendors. We have an online map that shows all of them, as well as a phone app that I'll talk about in a little bit too. So why? Like, some of you are probably going, well, I don't care, it's just a farmer's market. Well, there are advantages for you to sell through the farmers markets and through the Alberta Approved Farmers Markets in particular. Those minimum standards that we have in place in our guidelines are important for you as a potential vendor. One of those is our 80-20 rule, where the minimum number of, or minimum vendors in that market, 80% of them need to be Albertans who are making, baking, or growing the products they're selling. So this is allowing you preferential access into the farmers markets. Public markets do not have any sort of requirement like that. Their ratio could be 50-50, where 50% of those people are resellers. And right now, with our political turmoil and the fear of tariffs and the desire to support local, customers are going to want to go where there are more Alberta products than resellers. That's absolutely going to be a driver for people. Back in 1984-ish, Alberta Health revised our food regulation to include Part 3 for farmers markets. So this is, we are entrenched in legislation in our food regulation. And what happens is when I approve a farmer's market, it is granted a food permit, which is an umbrella permit. The market itself holds it, and anybody who is making food at home in their uninspected kitchen can sell at an approved farmer's market. And you actually can sell both low and high risk foods. They still have to be made safely, but you can have high risk foods. And this made in your uninspected home kitchens. And it's important that this exemption exists for us because farmers markets are and always have been a business incubator. It's where our newbies start out, they try their products, they see if they've got a product that more than their mom wants, to know if they've got those business skills, they can learn from those around them and decide if the food industry is really where they want to be. But it's also a place where you as established vendors could and should consider being, because you can continue to test market your products. Maybe you've changed your formulation and you want to see if customers like that. Maybe you've added different flavors, you're changing your branding, you're changing your packaging, and how is that going to impact what happens in your retail or food service world? Very important that you get that feedback and you get those customers following you. You drag them with you if you're selling into retail because they'll know about you and that will help market your product as well. That word of mouth is so important. We have our phone app and our website, so we list all of our Alberta approved farmers markets. We tell you where they are, when they are, contact information, websites, social media, that sort of stuff, so you as potential vendors can find them, but more importantly, customers find them. We have more than 30,000 downloads on that site or on our phone app, and it is used consistently. So people are looking for these markets and wanting to come buy from you. And something that Dolores and I work together on farmers markets, something that we see all the time is how many people are selling at multiple markets. When I started, most people did not, sell at 8 or 10 or 15 markets a week, but we see more and more businesses out there that use farmers markets as a large part of their income or even completely their income. So it doesn't mean that you have to be the little small entrepreneur who's just starting out. You can continue in this stream, and you should consider it a marketing channel that is really no different than retail and food service. It is an opportunity for you to make really good money. We also, as a vendor at the farmers market, you have access to become a member of the Farmers Market Association. And this is important because they are your voice to government. They are there to advocate on your behalf. If you don't have a web presence, they are there to take their members and put them online. So anytime you look on their site, you'll see vendors and where they sell and what they sell. You can access their vendor verification program where you are actually proving to the public that your product is your own and you're not a reseller. You can also access their group insurance programs. So they've got great programs for vendors as well for their products. And the last piece for me is to talk about our Made in Alberta program. This is a voluntary labeling program that actually our business development team worked really hard on for a couple of years to get developed. It is administered by the Alberta Food Processors Association on our behalf. It's a voluntary program, free to be a part of, as long as you grow, harvest, raise your product in Alberta, or the final transformation of that product has happened here. So the final processing of your food product. There's no requirement for, say, 51% Alberta ingredients or anything like that. It's just the final processing has to have occurred here. So if you go onto their website, madeinalberta.co, very, very simple to sign up to be on this program. So you can use that logo on your labels, you can use it on your websites, your signage, whatever you need to use it on, but it's a great way to be identified. And again, with the tariffs that are being threatened and the desire to support local, this is a great way to identify yourselves as being exactly what people are looking for. Right now, there are just shy of 600 companies on their list and over 800 products. So it's out there. And what's more important as the number of companies is the number of people that are hitting that catalog that's online to find these products. So it's super important that people sign up for this and continue to use it. So that is it for me. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you so much, Eileen. And now we're going to open it up to questions. And I know we are well past time for our webinar, folks. I'm going to leave the webinar running. You are free to stay. You will get the recording after. So if you need to go, you will know what questions are being asked. So to those online, if you have questions, please ask them. If not, that's okay. We'll open it to the room as well. So if you have questions, you can talk really loud or come up to the microphone. And yes, we have someone way in the back with their hand up.
I noticed that Stuart talked about our previous webinar that we did. And also Daniel talked about the front of label packaging. So for everyone here today and for the ones online, I think we will put the links for those two webinars that we have done, so that if they want to refer to those webinars as well as this one again, they can.
Yes, there will be a follow-up email that will go to everybody who is online and who is here in person, with everything that has been talked about to make your life as easy as possible. And yes, the person who just asked, copy of the presentation, absolutely, that will be being sent out to everyone as well. So those who may be ending online, thank you very much for joining us today. If you're sticking around, you'll get a survey that you get to do after. It'll just take you a minute, seriously. It's short and sweet. And if not, that's okay. If you have to go, that's great. But anybody in the room here, do you have questions?
Is there multiple ways that MSG can be entered on the label?
I'll leave that to our food scientists to answer.
If you put MSG in a food, is there multiple ways that it can be?
Come up to the microphone, whoever's going to answer it, please. And if we're talking about MSG and multiple ways of labeling it, and Daniel is going to answer it for you.
Yes, if you add MSG to your food products, it has to be declared by the common name. So monosodium glutamate would be how you'd be declaring on your label in the ingredient list. Correct, yeah.
Pretty sure lots of people.
There is different forms that people may use, but if you're adding monosodium glutamate, you'd be declaring it as that common name. So you will see things on labels that aren't always compliant. So when looking at other people's products and think that you can do the same thing, you could, but it may not always be accurate with the regulations. Just because somebody else is doing it doesn't mean that it's right. We see that quite a bit where there are certain things that people are putting on their labels that doesn't fully comply with regulations.
Is there any other questions in the room?
Yes.
Okay.
A little bit the costing. So for example, like if I want to develop a soup, I have a recipe. So I'm coming here, book a scientist. So like there is a fee for that, like, you know, how does it work? Because I know some of these test kitchen or I don't know, food lab, they want you renting the place when you make the soup, and then additional to that, you have a consultation with the food scientist. So how does it work here? Is pretty much the same. Or?
Yeah, so the question from the room here is there a fee associated with working with our team to develop a product? And yes, there is a fee for technical assistance. So there's a standard fee guide on our website. And you'll see there that to work with a food scientist in the lab, you're going to pay $350 a day. So that gives you access to the food scientist, going to work in the lab together to develop your product according to criteria that we've discussed today, for determine what's best for it in terms of product formulation and process. Would like to scale up your product and go into our pilot plant and do it on a larger scale as a test batch, then the fee increases to $500 per day. And then the same cleaning protocols apply. So you would also be required to pay for that cleaning service according to the rates, which is $25 per cleaner per hour. And your process involves labor, you're responsible for labor as well.
So sorry, help me to understand further. So let's assume that I have the recipe.
Yes.
And I want to scale up, right? So how the process work?
Sure. So the follow-up question is you have a recipe already developed.
Yes.
So your understanding is you don't require any further development. In many cases, people will bring a formulation or a recipe to us. And to put it very bluntly,
yes,
they don't know what they don't know. And that's why, we have this role as food scientists to understand what needs to be known. We need to look at your product. Are the right ingredients being used? Have we met the right criteria in terms of things like product pH or maybe solids content? There's key things that we need to determine as scientists, and we have the expertise and we have the equipment here to help you with that. And then we also have to consider food safety, extremely important. So all of those, the key food safety criteria, we're going to take into account as well. So in some cases, there is a recipe or a formulation that is ready to go to scale, but we need to determine that first. So it is, in most cases, the majority of cases, we're starting at that development level first. We're starting at the lab level before we move on to the pilot plant scale.
So last question. When you say, let's say the product development stage, as you said, as a first step, when you say 350 all day, how many hours is all day?
Sure. Yeah. So the follow-up question is, what does one day look like in terms of working here? So the facility hours are 8:15 to 12, you break for lunch, and then 1 to 4:30. You've got access to work in the lab with the food scientists during those working hours. Okay, thank you. You're welcome.
All right, are there any further questions? Talk loud, please.
Yeah, I was wondering, we spoke about heat and high acid. So if you're just talking about pH, okay, how does that work? If you're just going to keep pH as a CCP, and how does it work alongside what activity?
So the question from the floor here is, how do we consider other CCPs in in our manufacturing process. So today's topic was to cover high acid hot fill. Yes, there are other critical control points that we can consider for products. The case you brought forward is water activity. And there are certain criteria. If we meet certain water activity requirements, yes, those can be a critical control point for considering or for achieving the inhibiting the growth of microorganisms, so inhibiting the growth of bacteria, yeast, and mold. So that's a very large topic for discussion. And if you want to discuss that further, please engage with us, our team. We'd be happy to look at your product and help you determine what's the most appropriate in terms of product formulation and processing.
Great. Next question.
I was going to ask if you're going to get a tour of any of this.
Question is, well, it's about a tour of the facility. So no, I'm sorry, you guys online can't have a tour today. Craig, I don't know if we are doing a tour or not.
Do you want to take this? Sure.
Sorry, no, a tour is just not part of our in-person offering today. We have some one-on-one sessions for, I think some of you have signed up for a one-on-one session with either Craig or I to talk about individual products, but that'll just take place in our lab, and otherwise we don't have the time just today. Sorry.
Doesn't look like we have any more questions, so I would like to thank everybody who was here today, who is still with us online. And thank you very much for joining us. And again, I apologize for going over time, but I hope all of you have a great rest of your day. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.